The year was 1865, and the frontier was a promise written in blood and dust. The war had ended, but peace was nowhere to be found. The land stretched wide and wild beneath a sky too large for mercy, and the people who dared cross it carried their pasts like loaded guns. Among them rode Clara Wren, her white bonnet turned gray with trail dust, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if it could erase what she'd lost. She sat in the back of a covered wagon, hands folded tightly in her lap, the faint tremor in her fingers betraying the storm she carried within. Elias Boone rode beside the wagon, reins gripped firm, his shoulders squared beneath a sun-bleached shirt. A man carved by war, quiet, watchful, always measuring the distance between threat and safety. He had once worn gray, she once wept for blue, and yet here they were, bound not by colors but by survival. The plains around them were empty save for the low hum of wind and the rhythmic creak of wooden wheels. Each sound felt borrowed, fragile, like peace pretending to last. The caravan moved west, 5 wagons, a dozen souls, all chasing the same mirage, land, freedom, a future. Dust clouds rose behind them, swallowing the tracks they left. Clara's father, Reverend Wren, rode at the front on a thin, stubborn horse. His faith had survived the war, though his body had not come out unscarred. He had a preacher's voice and a soldier's eyes, steady, searching, and tired. Elias lifted his gaze to the horizon, narrowing his eyes. "Storms changing," he muttered, though the sky was clear. Clara looked up. "You mean the wind?" He shook his head. "No, the kind that walks on 2 legs." Before she could ask, it came, a sound like thunder but sharper, meaner. Hooves, shouting. Then a gunshot split the air. Chaos swallowed the calm. The wagons jolted to a halt. Horses screamed. Clara's father shouted, orders she couldn't hear. Men scrambled for rifles. Women pulled children beneath canvas. Elias drew his revolver and turned his horse, voice low but fierce. "Stay down, Clara!" The raiders came fast, shadows on horseback, bandanas over their faces, rifles glinting in the sun. They circled the caravan like wolves around a wounded herd. Bullets tore through canvas. Clara ducked, heart pounding. She caught a glimpse of her father standing tall, Bible still in hand, before a flash of gunfire threw him backward. Her scream was lost in the roar of hooves. Elias leapt from his saddle, firing twice. A raider fell. Another rushed him. Elias met him head-on, the butt of his revolver cracking skull. He turned toward Clara, grabbed her by the arm. "Move." They ran, dodging smoke, bodies, and burning canvas. The wagon behind them erupted in flame, a child's cry piercing through the chaos before being smothered by the fire's roar. Elias dragged Clara toward the treeline. Behind them, the caravan burned like a funeral pyre. When the last echo of gunfire faded, the silence that followed felt heavier than the smoke. The plains lay still again, littered with ash and blood. Elias lowered his revolver and stared at what remained. 5 wagons reduced to 2, maybe fewer. The wind tugged at his shirt, carrying the smell of charred wood and iron. Clara knelt beside her father's body, her hands shaking as she tried to close his eyes. Her voice broke. He was praying even then. Elias said nothing. He holstered his gun, jaw clenched, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of returning riders. None came, only the endless, empty land. When the sun dipped low, they built a small fire from broken wood. The others who'd survived had fled in different directions. Elias and Clara were alone now. She sat wrapped in a blanket that smelled of smoke and sorrow, her face streaked with ash. Elias worked quietly, setting a perimeter, his every movement precise and weary. Neither spoke for a long while. The fire cracked softly. Coyotes howled in the distance. Finally, she said, "You could have left me." Elias didn't look up, didn't think about it. "Yes, you did." He paused, the faintest flicker crossing his face. Maybe for a second. She stared into the flames. "Why save me, then?" "Because your father would have done the same," he said, his voice roughened by more than dust. "And because I owed him." Clara looked at him, then really looked at the lines carved deep around his eyes, the faint scar along his neck, the sadness that clung to him like shadow. She remembered the night years ago when she'd met him, not on this trail, but in a battlefield infirmary. A wounded Confederate prisoner, pale and shaking, asking for water. She'd given it to him when no one else would. That small act had changed something neither dared name. Now, under the dying light, that memory flickered between them like the fire's glow, brief, fragile, but real. Elias stood and moved closer to the edge of the firelight, scanning the darkness. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll come back for what's left." Clara's voice trembled. "Where do we go?" "North, to the ridge. There's a trail that might lead to the river." "My father?" Elias turned, eyes hard. "He's gone." The words hit like a bullet. She flinched. Her hands balled into fists in her lap. "You speak of death as if it's weather, something you can ride through." He met her gaze. "I've seen both. Death stays longer." For a moment, only the fire spoke. Sparks rose like lost prayers. Clara pulled her shawl tighter. She wanted to hate him for his coldness, but she saw the truth behind it. War had carved the softness out of him, same as it had done to her. When dawn bled across the plains, they began to walk. The land was endless, indifferent. Buzzards circled above. Clara stumbled once, catching herself on a broken wheel half buried in the dirt. She reached down, brushing aside ash, and found a small wooden doll, its face blackened by smoke. She froze, then lifted it gently, holding it to her chest. Elias stopped beside her, watching. "You should leave it." "It belonged to a child," she whispered. "It'll only slow you down." She didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the doll. "So will grief," she said softly, "but I can't leave that behind either." Elias looked away. His hand twitched toward her shoulder, then hesitated, falling back to his side. He wanted to speak. Some words of comfort, or perhaps apology, but none would come. The silence between them was heavy, alive with what neither dared say. As they turned toward the horizon, Clara cast one last look at the smoldering wreckage of the wagons, the last pieces of her old life dissolving into smoke. The wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of burnt cedar and death. Elias walked ahead, his figure dark against the rising sun. Clara followed, the doll pressed to her heart. Behind them, the fire hissed out, leaving only the echo of what had been. That in that silence, something unspoken began to take root, not forgiveness, not yet, but the faint hum of connection born from shared ruin. The world around them had gone quiet, but between them, the silence spoke louder than grief, louder than fear, louder than the guns that had torn it all apart. And as the plains swallowed their footprints, the sound of the wind was the only witness to the fragile beginning of something neither of them yet understood. Dawn crept slow and gold across the plains, dragging light over the charred remains of what once was life. Clara walked beside Elias, her dress torn at the hem, her boots heavy with dust. The horizon shimmered like a false promise, a cruel mirage whispering of safety just out of reach. She clutched the little wooden doll in her hand, its blackened face warm from the sun. Elias moved ahead of her, scanning the ridgelines with eyes trained by years of war. He had said little since they left the burned wagons behind, and in that silence, Clara found herself listening to things she'd never noticed before, the sigh of wind through dry grass, the groan of her own heartbeat, the rhythm of his boots against the earth. By midday, the heat pressed down like judgment. Their canteens were near empty. Clara's throat ached from thirst, her vision flickering between shadow and light. When they reached the crest of a rise, Elias stopped. Below them stretched a valley of brittle sagebrush and twisted rock, the kind of land that could swallow people whole. He dropped his pack and knelt, scanning the distance. "Smoke," he said quietly. Clara squinted. A thin gray line wove upward from beyond the rocks. "Could be survivors," she said. "Could be the men who made sure there weren't any," he replied. They descended carefully, moving between stones that seemed older than memory. Clara's nerves thrummed with every step. When they drew close enough to smell the smoke, the wind shifted, carrying with it something else, the faint iron scent of blood. Elias motioned for her to stay behind and crept forward, revolver drawn. Moments later he returned, jaw tight. "Empty camp," he said. "3 horses, no riders. Fire's still warm." Clara knelt beside the ashes of the campfire. "Someone was here not long ago." Elias nodded. "Or still is." A sudden rustle snapped through the brush. Elias raised his gun. Clara froze. From the shadow of a nearby rock, a figure stumbled forward and fell face-first into the dirt. A man, young, dark hair tangled with leaves, his chest slick with blood. He muttered something weakly in a language Clara didn't know. She rushed to him before Elias could stop her. "Don't," he warned. "Could be bait." "He's bleeding," she said sharply. "Bait doesn't bleed like that." Elias cursed under his breath, but knelt beside her. The man's eyes fluttered open, dark and fevered. He whispered again, voice broken, a word that sounded like Chaska. Clara tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it to his wound. "We need to get him out of the open," she said. Elias shook his head. "We can't carry him far. He'll slow us down. Then he'll die here. Maybe he already has." Her eyes flared. "You're not God Elias Boone." "No," he said quietly. "Just someone who's seen too many die already." She didn't answer, only pressed harder on the wound until the bleeding slowed. Finally, Elias gave a resigned sigh and lifted the man over his shoulder. They followed the faint curve of a dry stream bed until they came upon an abandoned trading post half-swallowed by vines. Its sign hung crooked, letters faded but legible, Whitley and Sons General Goods. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old whiskey and decay. A single window let in a shaft of dust-speckled light. Elias laid the stranger on a table while Clara rummaged through shelves, finding a bottle of carbolic acid and strips of linen yellowed with age. She cleaned the wound with steady hands. The man hissed, his breath ragged. "What tribe do you think he's from?" she asked quietly. Elias shrugged. "Could be Lakota, could be Cheyenne. Doesn't matter. They'll come looking. Then maybe they'll help us." His expression darkened. "Or finish what the raiders started." Thunder rumbled in the distance, low, rolling, ominous. Clara looked toward the window. "We'll need to stay until it passes." "Storm's not the only thing coming," Elias muttered, loading his revolver. Rain arrived first as a whisper, then as a roar. It hammered the roof, the sound mingling with Clara's heartbeat. She sat beside the injured man, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth. For the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to breathe. The storm made the world small, intimate, just 3 souls and the relentless drumming of rain. Elias stood near the doorway, eyes never resting. The light flickered, and for an instant she saw him as he must have looked during the war, tense, haunted, ready to kill or die without hesitation. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "Do you ever stop listening for danger?" He didn't turn. "The day you do, it finds you." The storm grew fiercer, and in its noise came another sound. Hoofbeats, faint but distinct. Elias stiffened. "Get down." He blew out the lantern. They crouched behind a counter as lightning flashed, revealing 3 riders outside, their faces hidden beneath slicker hoods. Voices carried over the storm, harsh, impatient. The door burst open. A figure stepped inside, dripping rain, rifle raised. Elias fired once. The man fell. Another shot came through the wall, splintering would near Clara's face. She screamed but kept low. Elias returned fire, his movements sharp, practiced. The smell of gunpowder filled the room. The remaining riders retreated into the rain, their shouts fading. Then silence. Clara rose, trembling. A corpse lay near the door, eyes glassy, mouth slack. She pressed her hands to her ears, as if that could block out what had happened. Elias walked to the window, reloading calmly. "They'll be back," he said, "but not tonight." She turned on him. "You killed him." He met her gaze evenly. "He would have killed you." Her breath caught between anger and fear. "How many times have you said that? How many ghosts carry that excuse?" Elias's expression softened. "Too many." The storm began to ease, the rain thinning to a steady drizzle. Clara returned to the wounded man, who was barely conscious now. She brushed his hair from his forehead. "He's burning up," she said. "He needs rest." Elias sat against the wall, revolver across his knees. "So, do you?" "I can't," she said. "Not yet." The fire they'd lit sputtered low. In its glow, Clara studied Elias's face, the weariness, the guilt, the loneliness that clung to him like a second skin. "You saved me again," she whispered. He looked away. "Don't thank me. I'm no hero." "Then what are you?" He hesitated, then said, "A man trying not to die the same way twice." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Outside, the rain quieted to a hush. The stranger stirred, murmuring something faint. Clara leaned close. "What is it?" He whispered, "River, west, safety." Then he fell back into fevered sleep. Elias exhaled slowly. "If he's telling the truth, we'll find water by morning. And if he's not, then we'll die walking toward it." Clara looked into the dying fire, her reflection wavering in the flame. Maybe that's better than dying standing still. Night deepened. Elias moved to the doorway, keeping watch under the dripping eaves. Clara began to hum softly, a tune her mother used to sing while mending clothes. The melody wound through the silence, delicate and sorrowful. Elias closed his eyes, listening. For the first time in a long while, the sound didn't remind him of loss. It reminded him of living. When her voice faded, only the quiet remained, thick, heavy, yet somehow comforting. He looked over his shoulder and saw her asleep beside the stranger, head bowed, hand resting on the doll in her lap. He smiled faintly, a man learning the weight of peace one breath at a time. Outside, the wind whispered through the broken sign, and in the spaces between its creaks, the silence spoke again, gentler now, almost like hope. The storm broke over the valley like a furious god's reckoning. Rain lashed the earth, turning dust to mud, swallowing the prince of men who had already vanished into legend. Clara clung to her horse's reins, her knuckles white beneath the leather gloves, eyes straining through the sheets of water. The world had become sound and fury. Hooves pounding, thunder cracking, wind screaming through the jagged mouths of canyons. And somewhere ahead of her, Jonah was riding toward the end of everything. The letter he'd left her had been brief, too brief for a man whose heart once spoke in silences. Asterisk, if I don't come back, know that I did what had to be done. Asterisk, no name, no place. Just the weight of inevitability pressed into every stroke of ink. But Clara knew where he was going. She'd seen it in his eyes that last night by the fire, that hollow stare of a man who'd already made peace with dying. She reached the ridge by dawn, her coat soaked, hair clinging to her neck like black vines. Below her, the valley stretched wide, a sprawl of fog and death waiting to happen. The old Deacon mine set like a scar at its heart, its wooden frame blackened with rot, smoke curling faintly from the slag heaps. Jonah's horse was tethered near the entrance, lathered and trembling. Clara dismounted, every sense alive, the world sharpened to a blade's edge. Her boots sank in the wet soil as she crept closer. Voices carried on the wind, rough, cold, certain. Then a gunshot, one clean and deliberate. She ran. Inside, the air stank of oil and blood. Men's shadows moved along the timber walls, their lanterns throwing long, ghostly shapes. Jonah stood at the far end, revolver raised, a man at his feet clutching his side, gasping for air that would never come. Across from him stood three others, the remnants of Tate's gang, all armed, all too mean to fear dying. "You should have stayed, gone preacher," one sneered. His beard was streaked with silver, his smile a cracked scar. "This was our claim long before you rode in spouting salvation." Jonah didn't flinch. "You took what wasn't yours. You spilled innocent blood for profit." The man laughed. "Ain't that what the Lord does every season?" The next instant was thunder. Jonah's revolver barked once, then twice. Two men dropped, the third dove behind a broken cart, firing blind. Sparks flared off the mine supports. Clara hit the ground, a plank splintering inches from her face. "Jonah!" she shouted, but the wind and the echoes swallowed her voice. He turned, saw her, and something broke in his gaze, a flicker of sorrow, of all the words he never dared to speak. Then the last outlaw rose from behind the cart, a shotgun in his hands, and time slowed. Clara reached for the rifle strapped to her back, her breath catching, her heart hammering against the ribs that caged it. The blast came, a deafening roar, and Jonah staggered back, crimson blooming across his chest. He fired once more, even as he fell, his bullet finding its mark. Silence followed, heavy as judgment. Clara crawled to him, hands trembling, rain mixing with the blood that ran from his wound. He smiled through the pain, eyes unfocused. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "You knew I would," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "You damn fool." He coughed, a weak laugh slipping through. "Reckon I did." She pressed her hands against the wound, but the life was already leaving him. Outside, the storm was breaking, light seeping through the torn clouds. Jonah's gaze lifted toward it, as if he could already see beyond. "I try to make it right," he said, voice barely a breath. "For them, for us." Tears blurred her vision. "You did." His hand found hers, fingers cold but steady. "Tell me it mattered." "It mattered," she said fiercely. "More than anything." He exhaled once softly, as though setting down a heavy burden. Then he was still. The world went quiet, no thunder, no wind, just the sound of the rain easing to a whisper. Clara sat there a long while, his hand in hers, until the gray light became morning. When she finally rose, her face was pale, her expression carved in something stronger than grief. She walked to the mouth of the mine, loaded Jonah's revolver, and waited. By noon, riders appeared, Tate's men, drawn by the smoke and echoes of death. They came in slow, cautious, eyes scanning the ruins. Clara didn't speak. The first man dismounted, gun half drawn, and she fired. The report rolled across the valley, followed by another and another. When it was over, 5 bodies lay in the mud, and Clara's hand was steady as she reloaded. She buried Jonah at the ridge, where the valley wind could reach him. The cross she carved was simple, 2 pieces of oak bound with leather. Around her, the land was quiet again, the grass whispering in the breeze, the storm long gone. As the sun dipped low, she knelt by his grave and laid his hat upon it. The horizon burned red and gold, and she found herself speaking to the silence. "You once told me love don't need words," she said softly, "that it speaks when hearts can't. Guess you were right." The wind carried her words across the valley, and for a moment she swore she heard his voice, faint, warm, a promise on the edge of the fading day. That night she rode east toward the distant hills where the stars waited. She didn't look back. Behind her lay the mine, the dead, and the ghost of a man who had taught her that even in silence, love could roar louder than all the world's noise. Weeks passed. Towns whispered of the woman who rode alone, of the gun she carried, of the look in her eyes that could silence a room. Some said she was an angel of vengeance, others that she was searching for redemption. Clara didn't care what they said. She only knew that somewhere in the distance, under that endless sky, Jonah's voice still lingered, not in words, but in every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every quiet dawn. And when she reached the next town, dust on her boots and sorrow in her gaze, she paused at the saloon door and turned to the street behind her, whispering to the emptiness. "This story ain't over yet," she said. Then she stepped inside, and if you listen close enough, maybe you'll still hear it, the silence between them, speaking louder than any song the West ever knew. Asterisk, so what do we take from this tale? Maybe it's this. Love doesn't always need to be heard to be true. Sometimes the quietest stories echo the longest. Asterisk, if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.